Good evening, all. Tonight we are starting a bit early because we have an informational workshop. Angela Ray Duhame is with Partnerships for Success Coordinator, and she is going to tell us about the Partnerships for Success grant that is focused on prescription drug misuse. The program is for the next 3 years for Norwich residents. And I guess Mr. Nystrom and looks like Mr. Nash is detained.
I just want to give a really quick introduction. So I'm not Angela, I'm Leanne from Norwich Human Services. And if anybody saw the news today, you saw that Governor Chris Christie asked the government to declare the opioid crisis a national emergency so that more federal money would be flowed down to the local level for helping this problem. We hope that you're as proud as we are at the work that your community is doing to address this problem. I don't think there's anywhere in the United States that you can go where it's not a problem. And unfortunately, Norwich is on track this year to have twice as many deaths as we had last year due to this epidemic. So I think the work that Angela is doing is phenomenal. And Angelo Callis, our Youth and Family Services Director, and I am here in case you have any further questions.
Just make sure that you talk into the microphone, either one of what you're using, so that folks at home can hear.
Okay.
And I think it's recorded too.
All right.
Later.
Can you hear me well? Is that good?
Yep.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right. Excellent. And I apologize. I'm used to teacher style, so I'm going to try this format here, turning to the side. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of the history of just sort of what the grant is. The Norwich Partnerships for Success was awarded to Norwich Human Services in the fall of 2016. It's one of 8 communities, and the other ones are East Hampton, West Hartford, New Britain, Manchester, Norwalk, Vernon, and Winchester. So we're part of a cohort that are going through this cycle till 2020. It's a grant that comes from the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, funding that's channeled from SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse Mental Health Service Administration. And it's a 4-year grant. The first year was mostly planning and getting ready for it, and so we have the next 3 years to work on that. So the goals of the grant are to focus on expanding the public health model and looking at substance abuse from that public health model. There's a lot of different models around addiction, but in this way, it's what part can everyone contribute to. This is including law enforcement, the school sector, religious sector, civic groups, and how do we get everybody involved on that level to be able to address it. We're looking at community-wide strategies to reduce non-medical use of prescription drugs. And to align the community with the regional, the state, and the national initiatives. So it's really important that as we start to think about sustainability and funding down the road, how do we align what we're doing at this level with what's happening at the regional level, the state level, and the national level, okay? I'm gonna give you a little bit of data too. But just so we're on the same page, I know everybody has a different background when it comes to some of this stuff, but non-medical use of prescription drugs is actually referring to the intentional use of a prescription drug without a prescription. Okay, so that's youth or individuals that have access to prescriptions without actually having a prescription of their own. We're also looking at, it's used at a time frame that is not intended by the prescriber. So it might be using it longer, or it might be using it for a different reason. It might be using it to get high, but I'll talk about that in a minute, and then taking more than advised dosage. It's the gateway to heroin use, just so that I'm sure maybe some of you understand this better than others don't, but just to give you that basic knowledge. So if you're prescribed a prescription drug through the doctors, or you have access to an opioid, which might be like an Oxycontin, a Vicodin, a Percocet, right? So sometimes those prescription drugs, when they're no longer available, people have transferred over to heroin on the streets because it's cheaper, because there might be more access to it. So we look at it as an opioid crisis from both the pill perspective to all the way up to heroin, and all of those drugs together, okay? And how do we do prevention from prescription drugs all the way up to heroin use? So here are some rates of recent use in the past 30 days. So prescription drugs, marijuana, alcohol, and cigarettes. And this is for Norwich residents in grades 7 through 12 in 2015. This was the data that we used in order to launch Getting the Partnership for Success grant. So this is very unique, and I will say I've been in this business for over a decade. I've worked in many towns. I was just on a conference that was national. We were discussing the rates of use, and not every community, in fact, I still haven't found one just yet, that has a prescription rate use of prescription drugs that's higher than alcohol and marijuana. Typically, the rate of use is always alcohol is the top, followed by marijuana and then prescription drugs. So this really was that first time we started to see that what was happening in the news and all these things was actually a concern right here in Norwich. And when you break down the prescription drugs and you look at the types of drugs that are used, because it's not just opioids, it's also stimulants, and we also look at uppers and tranquilizers, you still see that pain medication is the top. So again, that's more data supporting that concept about the opioid crisis and that link to heroin use that's going on. So risk factors. The grant came with some prescriptions for me as to what we can look at and what we can't look at. And when we're doing prevention work, we're looking at social access, we're looking at family norms, we're looking at perception of harm and co-occurring disorders. Social access. So 11.7% of Norwich youth said that it would be very easy to get a prescription drug without a prescription if they wanted to, okay? So may not be as high as alcohol. We know alcohol can be a lot more accessible. There might be some sort of that rite of passage that everyone's going to drink, and sort of maybe, parents still maybe host parties for young adults at times. So it's a little bit less access for prescription drugs, but it still warrants a concern that we know youth are getting access to prescriptions and feel they could if they wanted to. So in terms of safe disposal, and so we have a police department that we have a safe disposal 24 hours, which is a wonderful thing. They were very first and foremost on the cutting edge to put that in. We market that all the time. We collect prescription drugs. That is one of the things that we do to defer social access. Securing medications in the home by sending out prescription lock boxes or disposals. You can have like these bags now where you can dispose of them at home. There's also been laws that have passed, limitations on prescriber practices. It was 7 days for your first prescription, but new legislation this year just put it down to 5. So 5 days for a minor for your first prescription of any kind of opioid or pain medication. And the prescription monitoring program is something that also has been in practice for a while. Doctors and pharmacists can enter in prescriptions. People can check to see if they are doctor shopping, if they've been flagged as having had a concern for taking abusive prescription medications. Family norms. So about 83% of youth report that parents would feel it was very wrong for them to use a prescription drug. And 73.4% say that's definitely true. Their family has clear rules in regards to discouraging them from using a drug. So this is a little bit of a nuance in prevention and education, because where alcohol and marijuana, sometimes parents may have a little bit of a lesser structure at home. Maybe it's okay to drink if they're under the certain house, on certain property. They might have certain things, right? There might be certain beliefs about family norms. But we do know that with prescription drugs, it's not the same thing. Parents are not telling their kids, we know you're going to drink or you're going to smoke at some point, so here, take this pill, right? They're not sending that message. And so we have a lot of families that are very concerned about prescription drugs as well. And so we know that that's an avenue for us to make sure that that communication with parents and children is strengthened, okay? So the perception of risk was really the key thing that popped up in the needs assessment for the community of Norwich. About 20% of youth report that they don't know how much risk is involved when using a prescription drug that's not prescribed to them, okay? So that's like 1 in 5 about that, saying that they don't know. Might be harmful and might not. And that's really an opportunity for this community to be able to know that we have youth that are sort of on the fence, right? And so with a little bit of education and a little bit of, when I'll talk a little bit about the media efforts and outreach efforts, it's an opportunity to put them in the right direction, right? Some of them, a lot of them are on the fence. And about 5% report there is no risk associated. And just to put that in perspective for you, we have communities where the new marijuana laws have affected the perception of harm so much that almost sometimes 30 to 40% of youth say there's no risk associated with marijuana use. So you can see that difference there. So overdose deaths in Norwich. So I think it's important to look at this because it sort of tells a little bit more of the picture. In 2015, we had 14 opioid-involved deaths, and then last year there was 23. Okay, so there's definitely an increase there. The average age went down a little bit from 45 to 42. The overdose deaths are a majority of white males. And then this residential location situation is that saying that a lot of them maybe perhaps are not making it to the emergency rooms. So while we have been in conversations and talking with hospitals and emergency professionals about how to do interventions at the ER when they come in for services, several of them are not making it there. Right? So how do we do outreach to our citizens in the community that might be isolated, they may be alone? How do we connect with them and make sure that they're getting information at their family level? So the other piece, the Norwich youth who had reported any mental health indicators, and I'll try to go over this very briefly as well, are 3 times more likely to report the misuse of prescription drugs. So this was the other part. So we'll launch a campaign and education around the risks associated, and then we're also going to look at vulnerable populations that are in the community, one being that is mental health. So a few things that rose up during the needs assessment is that 25% had had thoughts of hurting themselves in the past year. About 14% say they have hurt themselves. 23.7% felt sad or hopeless, and 12% had seriously considered suicide, and 4% had seen some kind of domestic violence. So putting these all together, we had a group of youth that were about 30% roughly, that is about risk for some mental health indicators. And when looking at them, that population was about 3 times more likely to report prescription drug use over other things. So it's, again, an opportunity to look at this population when they're at the school systems, they're in our behavioral health partners. Are they looking at substance abuse issues as well? Can we enhance screening? Can we enhance education and training and awareness around these issues so that we can look for those early warning signs? Couple of gender ethnicity things that came up. Females were slightly higher in Norwich as well for risk of prescription drug use. That is something that we're seeing as a national trend that's starting to pop up, which is a unique thing that we still have to look at a little bit because as you saw the overdose deaths, they were largely male for heroin use, but then prescription drug use at a younger age was largely female. So trying to understand that dynamic and what's happening if there's more access to prescription drugs for females. Is it an access thing for heroin for males? What is the dynamic of what's happening between that link? So that's something that we'll spend some time really looking at. Some race and ethnicity considerations. In general, nobody is at less risk than somebody else. It's certainly everyone is at risk, but just looking at this, I have begun to start to look at Hispanic and Native American populations and how we can be able to work with them better and to build more of cultural leaders that can tell us about what's happening within those subcultures and how we can do better prevention work with them. So the overall of the project is that we will reduce the rate of youth that report a prescription drug use in the last 30 days by 25% over 3 years. So that's bringing it from a 12.4% down to 9% in 3 years. It might seem kind of lofty for some professionals anyways when we were discussing this, but if you saw the rates of some of the things that have come down for alcohol and marijuana use in Norwich, the rates were pretty low. If you remember early on the slides, they were around 9%, and so we'd like to keep it right there around that same margin. So things that we will, in order to achieve that goal, we will increase the risk of perception of harm by 10% from 53 to 59%. And we'll do that through providing information on community outreach and media campaign. And I will tell you a little bit more about that. We'll have Norwich Unhooked that will come out. We'll be launching that in September. We'll be raising awareness through education of youth and family organizations. So through the youth and family services, through the school systems, we'll start to look about how we can embed substance abuse prevention education and really amp that up. enhancing coordination and collaboration efforts among existing social services. So we know that there's a lot of social service agencies in the area, and how do we maximize our efforts, right? Instead of having anyone do anything more programs, how do we embed it into the programs that already exist? For example, I'll be meeting tomorrow and doing a training for Mashantucket Pequot. We're going to start to begin to look at how we can connect our resources so that they have a behavioral health unit. When they have populations, Native American students that need to connect, they can utilize their resources better. And then how can they support us in our community as well? So it's really important to be able to do that. And then decreasing the rate of youth that report any mental health indicator in the past year by 15%. And the way that we'll look at doing that is providing brief assessments and referral services for youth and families, raising awareness through educational institutions and youth and family serving organizations, and increasing the use of evidence-based practices and programs. So for example, one of the activities that we've recently begun is that working with Norwich Public Schools, we began the conversation about how to bring some professional development in and enhance some trauma, right? So how can they look at some cultural trauma, some historical things that have gone on, if there's abuse in the home, poverty, homelessness, and how do we really put in a safety net for those youth that might be at a higher risk. And the Norwich Unhooked is the beginnings of a campaign that was started by a couple of youth that were part of a regional youth leadership program called Ally. And some students from NFA worked with the media department last year to begin what they called Norwich Don't Get Hooked. And they had this hook and the water and the prescription drugs on it. And so we've been working with a marketing company. I just started in the beginning stages to enhance that effort, to create a website that will house all the information on resources, education, tips for parents, access to Narcan, where to go for that information, places that they can submit questions and information, local providers. And so the thing is that we'll push through social media, through the newspapers. This is where you go, this is how you get the information. And so we'll really encourage everyone to help support that in any way that you can. And a list of our partners. How's my time?
Good, you have time. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
Yes.
My first question is, do you have any idea of the number of year-to-date deaths? I think Chief Daly indicated not too long ago that the numbers were rising.
The number of
related deaths this year so far. I think when he spoke a couple of weeks ago, it was already in excess of 20.
Well, and that data that we should, yeah, we had talked with American Ambulance earlier today, and they had noted at least 86 overdoses in the last year. That's not to say deaths,
Yeah.
but overdoses.
My second question is this program available to adults?
So the one thing that works with this is that I'm not providing necessarily a service so much as coordinating and enhancing the infrastructure that exists. And so there will be a part where families can be involved, and we have the hope that they can get education, information, referral sources. So that is open to whoever.
They will have access to all of our services, all of our departmental services, and our partner services. We can help expedite the case management aspects, expedited access to services through our department.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. What's after Narcan?
What is that?
What is after Narcan?
What is after Narcan?
Yeah,
That's a good question.
yeah. I think the parents
Yeah.
just kind of rely on that as a kind of a catch them and
I mean, I think it's
gonna save them.
at the training I'm doing tomorrow, I embedded a piece now about the controversy, because it has definitely sort of looks like a silver bullet to fix everything, and it's certainly not. By any means is it not. And that's where we go back to the real roots of prevention and education, and how do you get to that point where you're stopping it before it starts. Yes, we want recovery, and we certainly want to support those that are wanting recovery and wanting to get into services afterwards. But we also want to stop it before it gets to that point. And we need to remember that and go back to that.
I agree.
Any other questions? Yes.
Okay, so you spoke about the average age for opioid overdoses are 42-year-old males. You didn't give any idea or age for women who are abusing prescription drugs, but it's on the uptick. Do you have any statistics about drug use or abuse in school-age children?
So the abuse part of it is, That I don't have, because it's hard to know what's experimental at that age. So sometimes you have a youth that might just have begun using, and it might be hard to diagnose them with a substance use disorder. So a lot of times they might wait till they're just a little bit older in order to say this has become an addiction.
And to piggyback on what Alderman Braddock asked, the Narcan, I had the pleasure of doing a ride-along with the Norwich Police Department, and the night I was with them, I went to 2 drug overdoses, both of them on heroin. And the second scene that we went to, we got there, young man was unconscious on the ground, and the brother was saying, hey, just give him more Narcan. He came back from it last time. And I think the publicity about Narcan has been wonderful, except that now they think, well, as long as there's Narcan around, it doesn't matter. I can, give myself too much overdose, and the Narcan is going to save me.
Yep.
And I think that's a real concern, that this is the silver bullet that's going to save me, and I'm not going to get the treatment I need because the Narcan is going to pull me back from the brink of death.
Absolutely, and I think there's many of echoes that. I think when we have a crisis, it's our natural human instinct to say, we need a fix to fix this, right? And so it just was an answer that presented itself at the time. And I was part of the Narcan legislation in my previous job when it first started working. And, it was really intended to give the parents and the families that sense of empowerment that they could do something. And I think that I'm a Narcan trainer as well. I think the most important things that I saw and I've seen in Narcan is not that it necessarily may save a life, or that it's intended that some people never ever use it. But they go home, they have a conversation with their loved one, they say, hey, guess what, I went to this training. It opens up a conversation and a dialogue between parent and child, or aunt and siblings, and then maybe sometimes that culture can change and they start to realize that someone cares about saving my life and maybe I should revisit that. And so I think when you go back to the original roots of what was intended from legislation of parents that were feeling frustrated and powerless, that was where it went. And it has saturated, to a point where we have to remember the true prevention, the true education. And I hope to do that with this.
And my last question is, how does the school system, whether it be elementary school, middle school, or high school, handle when, Susie comes in and says, I know that Bobby's drinking alcohol, or I know that this one is taking his mother's pills, or how does the school system handle that when one student is reporting on another student?
Well, I can't speak
out of
on-
concern and not
Yep.
out of malicious intent.
And I certainly can't speak on behalf of school protocols at this point in the initiative, but this will be part of that coordination, is to look at, because we do have a juvenile review board where referrals get made if there's instances or laws that are being broken, and I'm sure the school has their protocols for handling it. But how do we coordinate those in a way that it's a real safety net? Because I think sometimes we get some fall through the cracks, obviously, of course, which is I'm sure what you're thinking, as that happens. We all know that,
Sure.
right? And so that is why they make these kind of initiatives, as a way of helping to make those partnerships a little bit tighter so that they can have that opportunity to review that stuff.
But you will be partnering with the school
Absolutely,
systems.
already have, yep. At both NFA and Norwich Public Schools have been extremely receptive and extremely involved.
Well, it's got to start there.
Absolutely.
Set at home.
Mr. Martin?
Nice presentation, by the way. Thank
Thank
you. My concerns are the spread of HIV. A lot of kids think that they're bulletproof, that nothing bad can happen to them ever. And they don't have the resources, I think, of an adult to go into a store or to go to a treatment center and exchange needles if that's there, because they're not educated enough to know to do that. The other issue is, I grew up in Hartford, around Hartford Hospital. At one time, that was the greatest concentration of IV drug abusers in the state of Connecticut, in that area. And disposing of needles. I had a friend of mine, just recently, her daughter stepped on a needle in a department store in one of the other towns from here. I won't mention the name because I don't want to be sued. But needles are everywhere. And the other thing is that what they're lacing the heroin with, the fentanyl, and who knows what will be the next greatest flavor coming out, because I'm sure this fentanyl is going to dry up because it's a big problem right now, and they'll find something else to take its place. I think those are issues that you should share with the youth that you're counseling when they come across for these programs, because to let them know that, okay, Narcan can bring you back, but HIV's forever.
And I think a lot of the education on HIV has gone to the wayside, I think, in the last few years. Not to say that it's not there, but we've sort of feel comfortable maybe a little bit with what we had done in the 90s and early 2000s, and we do need to remind that.
Yes.
I think that, so that's a really good and that's important feedback for when we start launching the campaign, because what we want to do is back to that perception of risk. What are the risks associated? They need to know that.
Thank you.
Yes.
Just very briefly, we have about 1 more minute.
Thank you. What, if you could just, like an infomercial, tell us what should be done with these drugs that are hanging around in a home where someone has expired? What is the best and safest way to dispose of those drugs?
I mean, the best way from our prevention professionals to bring them to our police department is what we would love. You know, we want that publicity, we want that community and police connection.
Right.
We want them to know that they can go, they could get information if they needed to, if they were concerned. I mean, it's open 24 hours a day. A lot of prescription drug boxes are not, so.
Thank you.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Very informative.
Thank you very
And
much
good
for your
work.
time. Thank you.
Good evening, and welcome to our council meeting for August 7th. Those of you who can, please stand, and Alderman Martin will lead us in a prayer.
Almighty God, we ask for your blessings upon the members of this council as we assemble here in this chamber to conduct the ongoing business of our city. With your guidance, we will strive to ensure that all our decisions are for the common good, and your inspiration will instill respect, compassion, and thoughtfulness in all our deliberations. Give us the strength and wisdom to lead by example as the people's representatives, and that peace and harmony will mark all our proceedings and keep us faithful to the trust placed in us by the citizens of our community. Amen.
And Alderwoman Philbrook, would you lead us in the pledge, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Adoption of minutes, July 5th and 2017.
A motion and a second, please. Alderwoman Philbrook, Alderman Braddock, is there discussion or changes? Hearing none, those in favor?
Aye.
And that's unanimous.
Public hearing 1, an ordinance amending the zoning ordinance of the town of Norwich by permitting drive-through windows as accessory uses by special permit within the neighborhood commercial district.
I declare this public hearing on, said proposed ordinance open. Will the clerk please read the letter?
Commission on the City Plan to the Honorable Mayor and all the persons of the Council of the City of Norwich. An ordinance amending Section 2.3.3.4 of the zoning ordinance of the Town of Norwich by permitting drive-through windows as accessory uses by special permit within neighborhood commercial district. The Commission on City Plan, at its June 20th, 2017 regular meeting, reviewed the above reference referral. Seated were Art Sharon, Michael Lahan, Frank Manfredi, Swanjay Singh Baheta, Daniel Dineska, and Jason Arnott. After careful consideration, the Commission voted unanimously to forward a favorable recommendation to the Council pursuant to Chapter 15, Section 4 of the City Charter, relative to an ordinance amending Section 2.3.3.4 of the zoning ordinance of the Town of Norwich by permitting drive-through windows as accessory use by special permit within the neighborhood commercial district. The reason? It is consistent with the Plan of Conservation and Development to continue to support development and redevelopment of node areas shown as cores on the economic development plan, as well as consistent with the strategy to review regulations to ensure that regulation facilitate desired growth. Respectfully submitted, Arthur Sharon. Also have a petition from Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. Also have a letter from Southeastern Council of Governments. And from the Planning and Zoning Commission for the Town of Lisbon.
So we'll proceed with the public hearing, and those who wish to speak in favor, please be sure that you state your name and address. And if you are speaking on behalf of a business that you are involved in, please state your home address as well as the business address. Go ahead, sir.
Good evening. My name is Bill Sweeney. I am a land use attorney and a partner at the law firm of Tobin Carberry in New London, Connecticut, 43 Broad Street. I represent the Emerald Revit Corporation, a commercial developer based in Providence, Rhode Island. My client develops light commercial projects throughout New England with a specialization in restaurant construction and remodeling. Joining me tonight is Jeff Benavides. Jeff is the Vice President of Operations for Emerald Revit. We appear before you tonight in your capacity as the zoning authority for the City of Norwich and with an application to amend the City of Norwich zoning ordinance. I recognize that this council does not handle very many zoning matters on any given year, and text amendments to your regulations even less frequently. I know you also have a busy agenda tonight, so I will try to be as quick and efficient as possible in my presentation to you, but I do have a legal obligation to create a record for this proceeding. Emerald Revit has secured purchase options on several vacant adjacent residential properties in the Norwich Town section of Norwich, and is interested in combining and redeveloping these properties for a new franchise restaurant development. This restaurant would have a drive-through window similar to many other nearby businesses. However, in the course of my client's due diligence for this project, and based on discussions with Deanna Rhodes, who's the city planner, it was discovered that drive-through windows are no longer explicitly permitted in the neighborhood commercial zoning district in which the subject properties lie. As a result of further inquiry, it also became apparent that drive-through windows, which were always historically allowed in neighborhood commercial districts, were inadvertently omitted as an allowed use during the drafting of the comprehensive update to the zoning ordinance in 2015. This is problematic beyond my client's particular project, as there's over a dozen neighborhood commercial districts scattered across the city, most of which are fairly small in size, and most of which are located within the core of older villages that make up the community. Limiting commercial development activities in these particular areas, many of which are desperately in need of redevelopment, doesn't make economic sense and it doesn't make zoning sense. So tonight, our application before you seeks to correct the omission and amend section 2.3.3.4 of the zoning ordinance to add drive-through windows as an accessory use by special permit. As I mentioned previously, prior to the comprehensive update of the zoning ordinance in 2015, and quite frankly for many decades, even when I was the city planner in the early 2000s, drive-through windows were permitted as attached accessory uses on any commercial use in the city in any commercial district. You could have a drive-through window on a restaurant, a coffee shop, a bank, a pharmacy, a dry cleaner, or literally any commercial use with no specific design standards whatsoever. In the 2015 comprehensive update, which this council approved, specific design standards for drive-throughs were adopted for the very first time, and they were codified in your regulations in section 6.16. I'd just like to hand out a handout that includes that to you. Mark this as applicant's Exhibit A. I've highlighted the pertinent section at the bottom of the first page, and it continues over onto the second page. These new design standards for drive-through windows included requirements for queue lanes, distances of pickup windows to adjacent streets, site access points, required screening, and bypass lanes. These were all very good changes. Of note, however, I would point out that Section 6.16.1.3, which I've also highlighted on the handout, implies that drive-through windows were to be permitted in all business and special zones in the city, and even went as far as to set a specific, unique requirement for drive-through windows in the neighborhood commercial district, which is signified by the NC. That setback of only 30 feet was different than all the other districts and allowed pickup windows to be much closer located to the adjacent street. The fact that this section talks about drive-through windows in the neighborhood commercial zone and includes this specifically tailored standard shows there was an intention in the regulations to allow drive-through windows in the neighborhood commercial zone, as well as all the other business and special zones in the city. In fact, if you look at the district regulations for your other business zones, the general commercial zone, the planned commercial zone, the waterfront development district, even your downtown Chelsea district, they all have drive-through windows explicitly listed as accessory uses subject to the design standards of 6.16. But this is where we run into the problem. When you look to your regulations for the neighborhood commercial district, and that's in section 2.2.3, which governs accessory uses and activities that are allowed in the neighborhood commercial district, drive-through windows are missing altogether. I'll just hand out this as Exhibit B, which is a copy of section 2.3. If you look on the second page of Exhibit B, you'll see the section that I referenced and the fact that drive-through windows are missing. This omission in section in this section of the neighborhood commercial regulations can only be reasonably explained as an error, an oversight in the drafting of the comprehensive update. The proposed zoning text amendment before you tonight acknowledges the error and proposes to correct the omission by restoring drive-through windows as an accessory use in this zone. Initially, my client and I had considered permitting drive-through windows by site plan review, as is required in all your other business zoning districts throughout the city. But based on the recommendation of your city planner, we are instead tonight proposing that new drive-through windows in the neighborhood commercial district would be subject to a higher level of review, a special permit approval by the Commission on the City Plan. In our proposed amendment, drive-through windows would be added as an allowed accessory use under Section 2.3.3.4, again, subject to the new design standards that are in your regulations. The special permit requirement is also important as it will mandate a public hearing on any proposal for a new drive-through window to ensure an opportunity for neighborhood input on any such plan. This recommendation of the city planner makes sense, as neighborhood commercial districts often serve as transitional areas between more built-up commercial areas of the city and nearby residential neighborhoods. And it makes good sense, and it's good planning to make sure that neighbors have direct input on issues relating to design elements like the location of a window, screening for the window, and hours of operation. We firmly believe that the proposed text amendment before you has no adverse impact on the general health, safety, or welfare of the residents of Norwich, and it would simply restore a use long permitted and currently part of Norwich's neighborhood commercial districts. As important, allowing drive-through windows by special permit is a sensible and measured way of allowing them only with appropriate community input. As you consider the application tonight, your charge by state statute is to determine whether this proposed text change is generally consistent with the city's plan of conservation and development and the city's zoning ordinance and zoning map. I would direct you to the letter that Ms. Barrett read into the record earlier tonight from the Commission on the City Plan that found unanimously that this proposal is consistent with the plan of conservation and development as it will support the development and redevelopment of economic development cores, which are within the city's villages and will facilitate further economic growth. I would also point out that the proposed amendment corrects what clearly appears to be an error in the regulations, and by adding drive-through windows back into the neighborhood commercial district, you protect the integrity of the ordinance going forward. I want to thank you for your time this evening. If you do approve the application tonight, I would remind you that pursuant to state statute, you must set an effective date for the regulation, and that should be made as part of your motion to approve. Both myself and Mr. Benavides will remain available if you have any questions for us tonight, but I would reserve my right to rebut any public comments later in the hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in favor? Anyone else wishing to speak in favor? Anyone else wishing to speak in favor? Anyone wishing to speak opposed? Anyone wishing? Yes, sir.
I defer to a council member's comment last agenda because I always thought these council agendas had to go through a approval process. The last meeting, one council member was commenting that the newspapers had advanced knowledge of an agenda item. My copy of this ordinance included a Shipman and Goodman Cumberland Farms enclosure, whereas the discussion by Mr. Sweeney was completely separate from...
I'm sorry, sir. Corporation Counsel says you're speaking on the wrong ordinance. This is only the ordinance concerning the text message change, not text message, text change. Sorry.
This was an exhibit for that ordinance.
Mrs. Banks,
No.
Mayor, I can assure the council that that Shipman and Goodman letter has
No.
nothing to do with our
Oh, I
application.
know
I'm
that.
aware of that.
But
Sir,
I say
it has, that is,
the exhibit for this particular ordinance was a Shipman Goodman.
no, I don't think so,
And-
sir. I don't know how that became incorporated into this, but that does not pertain to this
That's
ordinance.
why I say I thought that the content of the agenda had to pass scrutiny before it was passed out to the public.
It has, but I don't know what you're speaking about that.
Because
It does not have to do with this agenda, this
I
ordinance.
know there was no exhibit in the agenda for this particular, for
Thank you,
Mr.
sir.
Sweeney's
Thank you, sir.
discussion.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in opposition? Anyone else wishing to speak in opposition? Anyone else wishing to speak in opposition? This public hearing is closed. Thank you. Did you have something you wanted to say?
I have no rebuttal. Thank you, Ms. Mayor.
Okay, thank you.
Public hearing number 2. An ordinance appropriating $5 million for the City of Norwich Infrastructure Improvement Program 2017 and authorizing the issuance of $5 million bonds of the city to meet said appropriation and pending the issuance thereof, the making of temporary borrowing for such purpose.
I declare this public hearing on said proposed ordinance to be open. Would you please read your letter?
To the Honorable, from the Commission on the City Plan, to the Honorable Mayor and Alderpersons of the Council of the City of Norwich, the City Council referral, an ordinance appropriating $5 million for City of Norwich Infrastructure Improvement Program 2017 and authorizing the issuance of $5 million bonds of the city to meet said appropriation and pending the issuance thereof, the making of temporary borrowing for such purpose. The Commission on the City Plan, at its July 18, 2017 regular meeting, reviewed the above reference referral. Seated were Art Sharon, Michael Lehan, Swanjay Singh, Bhatia, Kathy Wazika, Daniel Dineska, and Jason Arnett. After careful consideration, the commission voted unanimously to forward a favorable recommendation to the council pursuant to Chapter 15, Section 4 of the city charter. Reason, it is consistent with the plan of conservation and development to provide for adequate infrastructure to meet the community needs and support desired growth patterns. Respectfully submitted, Arthur Sharon, Chairman.
We'll now entertain the public hearing. Those speaking and wishing to speak in favor? Those wishing to speak in favor? Yes, sir?
Hi, Brian Thompson, Public Works Director. I just wanted to, again, remind everybody what the purpose of the bond is. This is primarily our paving program for the next few years, getting us back into a cycle where we are touching every road once every 20 years to continue to get us into industry standard on our road maintenance. Some of the money would not be for paving. A very small amount of it would be for some sidewalk upgrades and repairs throughout the city in some areas, and then some ADA compliance upgrades in the downtown area, as well as some of the money would be used to pay for design fees on the 3 bridges that are currently under construction or under design. And I can give you some more information on that if you'd like to ask. That's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else wishing to speak in favor? Anyone else wishing to speak in favor? Anyone else? Yes?
Good evening, Sheila Hayes, 288 Central Avenue here in Norwich. I come before you to speak in favor of supporting this bond for the infrastructure of the city as a person who does a lot of walking and as well as many people do a lot of driving. The one thing, our roads and our sidewalks, we do need to pay attention to them. There are some other items that I wish would be addressed and hopefully in the future will be addressed, like signage into the city and some other areas to make getting around the city more feasible and easier for people, especially people who come from out of the area. So I'm hoping that you will support this bond, and as we move forward with the Public Works Director laying out a plan for the city, that this bond as well as future bonds will help enhance the city and help be a strong economic driver in the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak in favor?
Alana Sherman, 65 Cedar Street in Norwich. I think this bond creates a wonderful opportunity for increasing accessibility for people with disabilities in the city. The city, under Title II of the ADA, has strong and stringent obligations to make sure that people who have various disabilities, especially mobility disabilities, can move through the city freely and independently. I know that Ryan has expressed interest in increasing this kind of accessibility in the city. This could become part of the city's ADA transition plan. New curb cuts could be installed, which create much safer passage and often the only possible passage at intersections for people with disabilities. So I encourage support of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak in favor? Anyone else wishing to speak in favor? Anyone else wishing to speak in favor? Anyone wishing to speak opposed? Yes, sir?
Rodney Boyce, 62 Roosevelt Avenue. I realize we have a city to run and maintain. I do maintenance every stinking day of my life, from picking up trash to putting on roofs. Sidewalks and all that have to be repaired. I understand all of that. But what I don't like to do, and that is add to our little credit card. Every year, we make a budget, and then promptly after we make a budget, we start tacking on these things afterwards. Now, that's not the way I do my business, and I've been doing it for 50 years, and I'm solvent. And quite frankly, this town isn't solvent. We got a $50 million credit card outstanding right now that we owe. And every stinking year, we do this same thing again and again and again and again, adding $5 million here, $3 million there, $400,000 for uniforms or something that should have belonged in the last budget. Now, that's my main objection to something like this right here. I expect you people will probably pass this tonight, because this is the way we've been doing business now for the past 40 years. When I asked one of our treasurers, why do you keep on doing this? He says, because it works. It works. Everybody is scared to put something like this into a budget, $5 million into our regular budget, because it's going to raise our taxes. Well, I just did a quick estimate back here and figured, well, we're probably paying $1 million of this back every stinking year, plus we're paying 2 to 3%, whatever the municipal bond rate is, every year. I've done this. I've bought bonds in the past. I like them. I don't pay taxes, state and federal on it. But this is not a winner for us. We've got to cut back on this stuff here. Some of this and some of the stuff that you're going to do the rest of the year needs to be put in the budget. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else who wishes to speak in opposition? Anyone wishing to speak? Yes, sir?
Good evening, David Crabb, 47 Prospect Street. To follow up the previous speaker, the format of this proposal is not in accordance with the Norwich Charter. Compared to the care exercised to shift the rainy day fund for implementing a nickel-dime tax cut, that some of these items could have been put in the capital improvement budget, as he said, to save some money. To do that, they comply with budget chapter Roman 7, section 12, 14, and 16 for that nickel-dime tax cut. However, section 17 requires the City Planning Commission to propose capital projects going out for 4 years with cost estimates. The first sentence about ordinances in Council Chapter Roman 5, Section 9 confines the topic to a single subject. Now, borrowing in Chapter Roman 8, Section 1 lists 6 purposes for Council's debt powers, with the first power that includes public improvements permitted by the CGS, semicolon, and acquisition of land, semicolon, and purchase of equipment, period, ending purpose number 1. So how did this $5 million program become a license to steal with my handout, section 1, line 5, permission for time-to-time determinations to borrow this money? Is that a valid question? This makes my stomach churn after the rainy day fund subsidized the nickel-dime tax cut that some of this stuff could have been in the capital improvement budget, and as this previous speaker said, saved the taxpayers dollars. The recent 19.9 million NPU ordinance included the cost for each project that was confirmed in section 2 and 3 of that. So where is the oversight provision in this section 2 and 3? Page 2 of the handout is a copy from a 2010 New York Times Almanac about Congress' 1999 override of the Constitution 27th Amendment to begin the increases to national debt by ending the notion that we're all equals, which George Orwell phrased quite differently. I think in Animal Farm, he said, not all pigs are equal. I oppose this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else wishes to speak in opposition? Anyone else wishing to speak in opposition? Anyone else wishing to speak in opposition? Hearing no further speakers, this public hearing is closed. Thank you all for your comments.
Second reading and action on the above ordinances. Number 1, an ordinance amending the zoning ordinance of the town of Norwich by permitting drive-through windows as accessory uses by special permit within the neighborhood commercial district.
Is there a motion and a second to waive the reading of the full text and incorporate it into the minutes, that ordinance being given the second reading? Alderman Martin, eagerly, and Alderwoman Gould. Those in favor? And that's unanimous. Is there a motion and second to put the following ordinance on the floor? Alderman Martin and Alderwoman Gould. Is there discussion? Yes, ma'am? Yep.
I oftentimes find myself walking a fine line between economic development and the preservation of neighborhoods. Although I applaud you for your interest in the city of Norwich, I have grave concerns about this. For the public's information, this text change will facilitate the proposed construction of a Burger King with a drive-through window on Town Street across from Irene's Restaurant. This will necessitate the carving out of the hillside. This falls into the neighborhood commercial. McDonald's, on the other hand, does not fall into the NC. It is in the general commercial. So let's make sure that we are talking eggs here and ham here. I also have great concerns. This is an historic neighborhood, and in the interest of full disclosure, I live on the Norwich Town Green. When I look out my backyard in the wintertime, I am assaulted by the light pollution from UCFS. Now you want to add to this. I find it interesting, Mr. Sweeney, that you used the phrase historically allowed, and the fact that you want to place this fast food restaurant with a drive-through window and the potential of a 24-hour service in an area that will directly abut the Norwich Town Historic Cemetery. Now, it has been suggested to me that be careful, where you go with this and that, I'm going to get my cards right out front so that you know from the get-go, as I say, that although I applaud your efforts, quite frankly, I don't think this is the appropriate place for this. As we promote our historic heritage and ask the people to go to the historic district on the green and walk through the historic Norwich Town Cemetery on their way to Benedict Arnold's or any other historic, significantly apropos place in the city of Norwich, that they will be going by the back end of a fast food restaurant. I know that I'm in the minority here. I know that it's going to pass. But I want it understood from the get-go that just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should. That's already a congested area. There's stuff going on right now. If you notice with the traffic lights, I haven't been able to ascertain what's going on. I understand it's a state highway. Again, as I said, I walk a fine line between economic development and free enterprise and that kind of stuff, but I will just close by saying that, again, just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should do something. Thank you.
Thank you. Corporation Counsel has reminded me to remind all of you, this is about a text change.
Well, could he explain then what a text change exactly means?
Certainly.
Well, the text change is,
Could you speak into
I'm
your
sorry, the text change is applicable to the entire city. Anywhere there's a neighborhood commercial zone, this would apply. The project or a project is the next step in the process. So I think what the council has to consider for purposes of its vote tonight is whether or not they support the text change. If the text change is approved and gives rise to a project, that goes before the commission and the city plan is the way this is set up. So in the context of discussion, the issues are out there, but that's the focus of what you really have to consider tonight. for
Thank you,
purposes
but
of the
my,
vote.
my rationale is that I believe that I have a responsibility to the citizens of Norwich, that if you don't know what's being proposed for the corner of your neighborhood, or what's being proposed for outside that front door, and all of a sudden there it is in your face, the door has already been opened and the door is slammed, the door is closed. So I like to get the information out there in the beginning.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion? Mr. Nash?
My only question, when the gentleman said that it was a it was missed somehow when they did this. Do we not know for a fact if it was deliberately not put in there for a reason? Or, I mean, he's saying it was missed by accident, that we just didn't put it in. But I don't know who did this ordinance, and was it deliberately not put in there for the purposes that Alderwoman Philbrick was mentioning? I don't know.
Perhaps a city planner can address that? I was actually on that committee when we made those decisions, and that's not something I can address.
Okay, thank you.
So I wasn't here also in 2015 when the regs were worked on. However, what Attorney Sweeney said, and I agree, is that this is in the regulations in the specific section about drive-throughs, it actually references what those criteria would be in the neighborhood commercial zone. So the assumption is, if you put this thought into, what those criteria would be and making it different and making it special, that it would have been in the table that allows it to happen. You know what I'm trying to say? So in the section, in the commercial zone section, it goes through every zone, and it tells you what you're allowed to do and what are accessory uses. And drive-throughs are accessory uses in many of the commercial zones, but it states it. It says it's, drive-through allowed by section, and it refers to the section 6, I think it is. I don't have it in front of me, which is about drive-throughs. But the section on neighborhood commercial, when you get to those accessory uses, it's missing that line that says drive-throughs per section so-and-so. But if you go to that drive-through section, it talks about neighborhood commercial zones. It says NC, and these are the criteria. So I think, I'm not going to speak for Attorney Sweeney, but what I'm saying is that if you created criteria for it, you needed to put the allowance in the regulations for it, and it's missing where it's allowed, but it has the standards.
So in your professional opinion as a planner, that it was just an oversight?
I think so, because it wouldn't have created standards, specific standards, if it needed to go back and have one line, which is what he's proposing to put in there. But again, right now in the other zones, it's just as a site plan, and my recommendation is, because I'm concerned about neighborhood commercial zones, which are throughout the city and not just in the area that Councilman Philbrick talked about, but I want to make sure that those areas are protected, and I think that being a special permit, which means the public hearing is required, you get more input, and it's a protection for the public.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Alderwoman Gould?
I will be supporting making this change to this text amendment, but I want to point out that the area that Mr. Sweeney Attorney Sweeney is talking about on Town Street for this particular project, the drive-throughs that are there now, besides McDonald's and People's Bank and Bank of America and Chelsea Groton Bank, all have drive-throughs. Bank of America and People's Bank already abut closely to the cemetery. I don't think this is going to have a tremendous impact on the cemetery. And while I understand Alderwoman Philbrick's concern, Town Street right now has full of drive-throughs. One more isn't going to change the circumstances there, and we're going to get rid of 3 empty, ugly houses and have a new business in Norwich, and that's great for economic development. So I will be supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Braddock?
Because of Mr. Sweeney's history in our community and his passion for our community, I certainly hope that he is at least recommended or considered to his client that there are plenty of opportunities in our downtown for a Burger King. It's a wonderful opportunity. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? Mr. Martin?
Yes, it's kind of sad. We're living in a lot of tough times right now. Taxes are high. Ask anybody who lives in our town, they'll tell me. We need economic relief, and this may provide some of it. And I'm sorry, I live on the other side of the tracks. I don't live in beautiful, scenic Norwich town. I live in the CCD, and I pay that 49 mill rate. And I welcome anything that comes into the town to take some of the burden off of the taxpayers of our city. And I'm not a NIMBY. Thank you.
Is there anything that wants to follow? Any further discussion? All right. Okay, we need a motion and a second to amend the ordinance to provide an effective date.
So moved.
And a second, and what would that be? Having a little trouble reading this writing.
I don't know that you're really amending, I think you're just adopting the effective date. The standard effective date of an ordinance adopted by the council, if it doesn't otherwise specify, is on the 10th day following passage and publication. So it's probably a good date to use.
The 10th day.
The 10th day following passage and publication, if it passes.
So who made the motion and second? Mr. Nystrom and...
I agree. I agree with
And you
both
agree.
motions.
And Mr. Braddock? Seconded. All those in favor of that effective date?
Aye.
Okay. Now we will do a roll call. Alderman Nash?
Yes.
Alderman Martin?
Yes.
Alderwoman Gould?
Yes.
Alderman Braddock?
Yes.
Alderwoman Philbrick?
No.
President Pro Tem Nystrom?
Yes.
Mayor Henchy says yes. The motion carries.
Number 2, an ordinance appropriating $5 million for the City of Norwich Infrastructure Improvement Program 2017 and authorizing the issuance of $5 million bonds of the city to meet said appropriation, and pending the issuance thereof, the making of temporary borrowing for such purpose.
Is there a motion and second to waive the reading of the full text and incorporate it into the minutes, said ordinance being given the second reading? Alderman Nash, Alderman Martin, those in favor?
Aye.
And that's unanimous. Is there a motion and second to put the following ordinance on the floor? Mr. Martin and Mr. Nash? Just a reminder, this will require a 2/3 vote for passage, and so is there discussion? Yes, ma'am?
For clarification, this is to put it on the referendum, correct?
Is this to put it on the
Well,
referendum?
it's twofold. The council is adopting the resolution tonight and votes it by a 2/3 vote, but it does not become effective unless it's approved by the voters. So you're correct that it's referred to the voters for their final approval.
Do you have another question?
I just wanted to follow up on Mr. Bowie's comment. And for the general public, we just passed a very contentious and difficult budget. We're still hanging by a thread, waiting for the state to figure out what they're going to do. I saw on the news tonight that some towns have already issued their layoff notices for teachers, that West Haven, I believe, has instituted a complete spending and overtime freeze. No money will be spent without prior approval from the mayor. And yet here we are, for whatever reason, be it whether you agree with it or you don't agree with it, if you take the sum total of the fire trucks, the infrastructure, and the $800,000 for the golf course, that's $9 million. Yes. $9 million. So I would respectfully ask if Mr. Pothier could explain to us what impact this will have on the city.
Mr. Pothier, would you like to come up?
Good evening. So this proposed $5 million infrastructure bond, I charted out what the debt service would be on this, assuming that, not all $5 million would be issued as bonds all at one time. The money's spent over a series of years. So assuming that it's the debt is issued over 3 years in 2 million, 2 million, and 1 million installments, the peak impact on the debt service for, say, a home with a $100,000 assessed value would be $26 per year for this particular project. And after that, it declines after that because more principal is paid off, so you pay less in interest and so forth.
Anyone else have a question for Mr. Patia?
Just to follow up on Alderwoman Philbrick and the other comments made, is the city of Norwich solvent?
Yes,
Okay.
Yeah,
And what's our credit rating?
AA.
Are we in trouble by taking on this load? Are we jeopardizing that credit rating?
No. One of the factors that the bond rating agencies look at is our, as a positive for Norwich, is our relatively low debt load.
Okay. Can we pay this debt back?
Yes.
Is Vinny Baboot's coming over and knocking someone's knees out or anything like that?
We have capital needs, and there's a, but this project by itself is not going to disrupt
Thank you, sir.
finances.
Anyone else have questions? Yes.
Thank you, Mayor. Just as a percentage of our budget, what is our debt service cost per annual?
This particular project?
Without this?
Oh, without this? I think our debt service is about 4% of our operating budget.
And you often hear the concept bond capacity.
Right.
What is our bond capacity with a budget based on the size of what we now carry?
So if you look at the statutory debt limit, it's the amount that you're statutorily allowed to issue is extraordinarily high. I wouldn't recommend anyone go there.
Right.
But so that's in the $500 million range or something like that. So we're having a debt service as a percentage of total operations of 4% range is pretty low. I think 8 to 10% is normal. But you got to weigh like where we are with pension funding and funding capital improvements and debt service. All of these things, they don't operate in a vacuum. So you've got to look at the total financial capacity. So increasing our debt load without, economic development, chipping away at our pension obligations, doing one thing without working on the other things would eventually affect our bond rating and then lead to higher debt costs.
And in the past, we've had the opportunity to refinance prior debt at a lower rate.
Correct.
And we take advantage of those opportunities as well.
Yes.
Thank you.
Anyone else, especially of Mr. Patia? Thank you, sir.
Welcome.
Is there any further discussion? Yes.
I'm going to be in favor of this, and I understand Mr. Bowie and Mr. Crab's concern. But understand that because we approve this tonight, means that it will go to the voters in November, and you, the voters, the city residents in Norwich, will ultimately decide whether or not you want to have improved roads, improved sidewalks, improved bridges, draining systems, all of those things.
Any further discussion? We'll do a roll call, and I'll remind, did you have something else, Mr. Braddock, that you wanted to say? No. And I will remind the council that this requires a 2/3 vote. Mr. Nash?
Yes.
Alderman Martin?
Yes.
Alderwoman Gould?
Yes.
Alderman Braddock? Sorry,
Yes.
I got going too fast. Alderwoman Philbrick?
Yes.
President Pro Tem Nystrom?
Yes.
Mayor Henchy says yes, that's unanimous. The measure passes. Thank you all.
Petitions and communication. Number 1, a report from the Commission on City Plan of Norwich exercising authority of the Planning Commission pursuant to Section 8.24 of the General Connecticut Statute, Chapter 15, Section 4 of the Norwich City Charter, an ordinance amending the zoning ordinance of the Town of Norwich by permitting drive-through windows as accessory use by special permit within the neighborhood commercial district.
You have a motion to accept, please? Alderwoman Gould, and seconded by Alderman Braddock. All those in favor?
Aye.
And that's unanimous.
Number 2, communication from Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection regarding the proposed text amendment to local zoning regulation, section 2.3.3.4, to add drive-through windows as an accessory to permitted use as a special permit use in neighborhood commercial districts.
Motion and second to accept, please. Alderwoman Gould, Alderman Braddock. All those in favor?
Aye.
And that's unanimous. Thank you.
Number 3, communication from Southeastern Council of Governments regarding proposed text amendment to local zoning regulation, section 2.3.3.4, to add drive-through windows as accessory permit use as a special permit in the neighborhood commercial district.
A motion and second, please. Alderman Nash, Alderman Martin, down there. All those in favor?
Aye.
That's unanimous.
Number 4, communication from the Town of Lisbon regarding the proposed text amendment to local zoning regulations, section 2.3.3.4, to add drive-through windows as accessory to a permit use as a special permit use in the neighborhood commercial district.
Motion and a second to accept. Alderwoman Gould, Alderman Martin. Those in favor? And that's unanimous.
Number 5, report from the Commission on the City Plan of Norwich exercising the authority of the Planning Commission pursuant to Section 8.24 of the General Connecticut Statutes and Chapter 15, Section 4 of the Norwich City Charter, an ordinance appropriating $5 million for the City of Norwich Infrastructure Improvement Program 2017 and authorizing the issuance of $5 million bonds of the city to meet said appropriation, and pending the issuance thereof, the making of borrowing for temporary purpose.
A motion and a second, please. Alderman Nash, Alderman Martin. Those in favor? And that's unanimous. Thank you.
Letter of resignation from Mike Valentine, Harbor Master.
Motion and second, please. Alderman Braddock, Alderwoman Gould. Would like to thank Michael for his many years. I don't know, does anyone here know how many years he was the harbor?
I think either between 4 and 6, I think.
Yeah, he's a long time. Did a nice job. So we thank him for, oh yeah, it says right here, for the past 5 years. So we thank him very much for his time and effort. Those in favor of accepting, and that would be unanimous.
City Manager's report.
Thank you. This is the City Manager's report for August 7th, 2017. The Mayor and I continue our weekly meetings. We met with staff regarding the Route 82 project in Cumberland Farms. We also met with recreation staff regarding the potential of creating a croquet practice court somewhere in the city. We are investigating a site at the Senior Center which has a good possibility for very little cost. On July 17th, I met with Attorney Ken Plum and staff regarding police contract arbitration. I also had my monthly meeting with department heads. Donna Ralston, assessor, stated that the city's revaluation started on July 19th. Otis Library Director Bob Farwell said that there has been an increase in the summer lunch program and that in June, 250 meals were served to children under age 18 in conjunction with the summer learning program. City Planner Deanne Rhodes announced that Reagan Minor, Norwich Historical Society consultant, would be working 2 days a week with the city on the Uncas Leaf project. Public Works Director Ryan Thompson stated that his staff was completing the finishing touches at the Taftville Playground, which includes a large handicapped accessible playscape, swing set, and new benches at the site. 2 conference calls have been held with representatives from the Women's Institute and staff regarding the development agreement for Reed and Hughes. I met with members of the Norwich Golf Course and staff regarding the proposed water storage pond. On July 25th, the mayor and I had a conference call with Commissioner Melody Curry. A Public Works Dispatch Union negotiation was also held. On Tuesday, August 1st, I had the pleasure of attending National Night Out at Brown Park. There was a large community turnout for this event that celebrates police, fire, and emergency departments throughout the nation. Thank you to those involved in organizing and participating in this free family-friendly event, which showcased numerous local organizations. I attended Department Head City Coordination Meeting at NPU Training Room on Thursday, August 3rd. I also met with Johnny Wong for an update on the usage of the Intermodal Transportation Center for bus service from New York City. I have scheduled a meeting with the owner of the bus company for this week. That concludes my report for this evening.
Does anyone have any questions of the city manager? Mr. Braddock?
Mr. Salamone, where is the croquet pitch going to be?
That's to be determined. There is not a specific site at this point.
Okay, and if we may go to the Reed and Hughes, is there funding in place for the Reed and Hughes now?
To my knowledge, the funding is not totally in place.
When you mean not totally, what does that mean?
That means that they need around $450,000 to accomplish the stabilization part of the project, and to my knowledge, all 450 has not been secured at this point.
How much has been secured?
We don't have an official number on that yet, so I don't want to assume what they have and what they don't.
Any other questions? Yes, sir?
What happens if they don't get their funding?
If they don't get the funding, we don't sign the development agreement, and we're back to consideration of demolition.
So it starts the process all over again?
No, I wouldn't recommend that. I would recommend that we go back to the state to proceed with demolition, since we have done a very due diligence situation to try to obtain developers to renovate the building, and if this fails, it would go down with about the previous failures in being able to secure that. So that would not be a decision for me, but that would be my recommendation, and we don't start from ground zero again.
I have a follow-up to that. What about the situation in Mohegan Park? Where are we at in this whole thing? Are we pretty much scrubbed out for this year?
As far as...
Lifeguards?
Yes.
Okay, so there's no swimming at all this year?
Not at the park. I do want to mention that Leanne is not here tonight.
Yeah,
No,
she's here.
she is. We're going to formally announce later on this week that we're going to be sending a bus to New London public swimming pool for residents at no cost to them to have an alternative swimming program at least through the end of August and maybe through Labor Day. Obviously, it's not going to replace the swimming there, but we want to be able to offer some swimming to residents.
And that's going to be funded through the lifeguard salary?
That's correct.
Okay.
Anybody else have questions? Yes?
I just want to go back to Reed and Hughes for 1 minute. How much time, is the clock ticking on there?
The clock will be ticking next week. They have 3 months from next week to get the final amount of money they need. And so if the money is not obtained by October approximately, then the council has to make a decision about what the direction is per the discussion previously that I just discussed.
Thank you.
Mr. Braddock?
Mr. Salamone, when we boarded up the Reed and Hughes building, and I've noticed it's just plywood. But yet, if I was to go out and do the very similar thing, I would have to paint the plywood. Is that correct?
Paint where it's boarded up?
Yes.
I can't answer that question exactly. I don't know if we paint all structures that we board up. I don't think we do. But I certainly could look into it.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the city manager? Yes,
Yes, John, explain to me again about the bus to New London. I mean,
No, not to New London, to New York. The
no,
bus-
for the swimming.
Oh, the swimming. Oh, okay. I
To
thought
New
you-
York will probably be next.
Yeah.
I'm being facetious,
I
but
know.
sometimes these things, I don't know where they come from. I
Well,
honestly don't.
I had a discussion with our Director of Human Services, and inquiring how we can at least have some type of opportunity for children to swim. I suggested that they look into a program where we could use a municipal pool in another municipality. Leanne came up with this program, which obviously is not a replacement for what we have, but will give at least a weekly opportunity for some swimming.
So they'll go once a week?
At this point, once. I think if it does, if it gets overwhelming fill up, then we can see if we want to expand it beyond once a week. But we wanted to first, excuse the pun, test the waters this week, see how it goes, and if there's overwhelming demand for it, then we would expand it.
Any further questions for the city manager? Thank you, sir.
Citizen comment on resolutions.
This is a time when you can speak on the resolutions at hand. I'd ask you to limit your comments to 3 minutes. Be sure you state your name and address. And again, if you do not live in the city, but you work in the city and this is something that's important to you, please so state where you live as well. Yes, ma'am?
Sheila Hayes, 288 Central Avenue. I realize that you have passed under the ordinance to allow for the $3,200,000 for the public safety equipment, but I stand before you asking, what I don't remember is any of you asking.
Excuse me, just one second.
Is that on a resolution tonight?
Resolution 1?
Are you speaking on Resolution 1?
Well, yes.
Okay.
That I don't remember back during the public hearing, so I'm asking if I could have the answer prior to you voting about the issue of the debt service and how long this $3.2 million, how the bond would be floated, and what would be the debt service, because where I do agree with my colleagues earlier is when it comes to equipment. I think that is very different than infrastructure. The life of equipment has a very different life expectancy and what can happen to it. And obviously in the past, we had funded public safety equipment out of the capital portion of the general fund. And this was a change that was occurred this year. So I would like to at least have a better understanding of the debt service, the time frame that the bonds would be issued, and what then would be the payment replacement payment plan back, and what it would cost the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak on the 3 resolutions at hand on the agenda? Did you want to speak? No, this is just regular public comment. You can be either for or against. You just have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Rodney Boyd, 62 Roosevelt. I'm against this because of its carte blanche thing. Now, the things you list in here alone are not authorized for a 20-year bond. When you put out equipment and things like this that have a life of, let's say, an air mask or something has a life of 3 years, it's not supposed to be on a 20-year bond. That's supposed to be part of our budget, and it's not part of our budget. And again, we're tacking this on just like it was a credit card. And I am adamant about credit cards. I started my finances out with running a loan shark business on a Navy ship. I know all about credit cards.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on these resolutions? I think that loan shark comment got me. Yes, sir? I forgot where we were.
Army's the same way. It's John Blackburn, 15 Alice Street. I'm speaking in favor of this resolution for this equipment. And the only stipulation, it's probably going to pass because the board is going to realize we do need this stuff. But if it does pass, the stipulation being from now on forward that any equipment that gets purchased by this city needs to have Norwich put on it as well as whatever location it's going to be in. And, well, I did have something to say, so thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else wishing to speak on the 3 resolutions at hand? Anyone else wishing to speak on the 3 resolutions before us tonight? Anyone else wishing to speak on the 3 resolutions? Hearing none, this citizen's comment is closed, and I thank you all very much.
Resolution 1, relative to providing for referendum vote to be held in conjunction with the municipal election on November 7, 2017, regarding an ordinance appropriating $3.2 million for public safety equipment and authorizing the issuance of $3.2 million bonds of the city to meet said appropriation, and pending the issuance thereof, the making of temporary borrowing for such purpose.
Is there a motion and second, please? Alderman Nash, Alderman Martin, is there discussion? Yes, sir?
Thank you. On page 56 of the proposed budget, it shows our city manager making $153,000. It's all public knowledge. And in our capital expenses, on 119, I believe it is, it shows that we had set aside $1,020,000 for a new fire apparatus. And we've gone to fleet maintenance and asked their opinion of the fire apparatus. It's old, yes, but it's all workable. This all happened. There was an election prior to that on November, and the whole council changed because of cutting dollars out. They wanted to cut taxes. And we had the money there. The majority spoke and said that we wanted to use that, take away that $1,020,000, which was a perfectly good way to develop a method by priority what fire truck had to be replaced. But now we're doing it, boys and girls, you can have whatever you want. That's 5 fire trucks. And not that I'm against fire trucks, but we had a process in place that says how we're going to do it. We pay a city manager a lot of money, we pay the fleet maintenance manager a lot of money, yet we don't listen to their advice. We take it upon ourselves to come up with this cockamamie idea of buying 5 fire trucks. And they may have a need for 5 fire trucks, but we said prioritize fire trucks. We're not doing it that way. We're going right back to where we were doing it before. If you want something, you just ask for it and you get it. And I don't think that that is how the voters felt in thought when they changed the council on November of 15. I don't think that at all. I think they got hornswoggled a little bit. Now, if you're talking $26 for one bond, you're probably talking $26 for another bond. And that is $52. And can our constituencies afford that? I don't know. I don't think it was played out fairly. I did vote for it on public safety, and I really wanted the voter to have an opportunity to speak their mind with it. I'm part of this public safety committee. I'm very dissatisfied with the process in which we decided on fire trucks, that of eliminating, prioritizing the fire truck, and to saying, whatever you want, we'll get for you. And the other part of it is that in that amount of money, that $3.2 million, that's not all for fire trucks. There's some amount of that money, I'm not sure of the amount, that is going to communications. Well, the communications is at least a $5 to $8 million adventure. We're not talking $5 to $8 million for communications. We're talking 3.2 for everything. So we're going to piecemeal this thing. So next year, whoever's sitting up here has to make a decision, does that fit into that opportunity? And I think we're just doing it the wrong way. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. The reference that Tucker, or Alderman Braddock, refers to, the $1.2 million for fire apparatus, was a proposed...
Could you please not direct your conversations to each other?
Sorry, thank you. Was proposed by our city manager in the April budget. That also proposed in the budget to spend twice the amount of capital that we have done in the past. It's true, this council chose not to do that, not to double the capital expenditures, because we are concerned about the tax burden on people. We're also concerned about cleaning up the mess of prior councils who have ignored public safety needs, and they've ignored the public safety needs of prior councils. So here we are again trying to fix that mess of the prior councils, which happen to be led by Democrats. And yes, it's expensive, but public safety and the price of human life is priceless, in my opinion. And so this question will go to the voters, where it belongs, where they have the final say. And that's a good thing, involving the public in their future, in what they do in this city. So referencing 1.2 as a better way, it never existed. It was a proposal. That's all it was. And yes, we cut spending and we cut taxes this year. And yes, we're waiting for the state to finally do their job. And we'll see where that lands. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Nash?
This was my cockamamie idea, so I'll talk about it. I've been sitting on the council for 8 of the last 10 years. I took 2 years off. My first year on the council, we cut the money to fire trucks. We cut all bonding to fire companies. We didn't give them anything. We also didn't give them Scott Air Packs, which, if you remember, quite recently, we approved an $800,000 bond to buy air packs because we had kicked that can down the road so long that firemen didn't have operable air packs. So my first year I sat on the council, we cut the funding. The second year I sat on the council, they cut the funding. The third year I sat on the council, they cut the funding. The fourth year I sat on the council, they cut the funding. I took 2 years off because I couldn't take it. I came back and they cut the funding. And we come back again this year and we cut the funding. When do you start thinking you can't do this anymore? 3.2 million is a lot of money. I got it. But we need trucks. There's 2 fire trucks right now at City Garage broke. Right now. So yeah, we did go by the City Garage and we said what needs to be replaced. And the trucks that are listed in here are the ones that the City Garage recommended to be replaced. These are the ones that they said were in jeopardy. As far as the bond, let's be honest, it's a 20-year bond. And, well, the trucks we're replacing are 30 years old. So I think we're getting our big bang out of the buck there. I think we're going to be all right, okay? we're going to be able to pay those trucks back in time. Is there a way we have to fix this? Absolutely. I said this when I supported the bond. I said this when at the public safety meetings. We can't do this every time we need trucks. We can't bond it every time we need a truck. We have to start putting money away. But at the same time, when you sit up here, and there'll be new people here, you will be inundated by people demanding that you cut spending, demanding that we cut the taxes, demanding that we stop spending things. And then you're going to have other people up here and say, don't cut this, though, but just save us money. So I don't know what we're supposed to do. We did cut funding. We did cut that money out, or we didn't approve that money. Let's put it that way. And the $3.2 million is not the answer. But the $3.2 million is what we need right now to get us up to at least par. Because you know what? Even after we spend this money and buy these new trucks, there's a couple of more trucks ready to come out too that we need to replace eventually. This is replacing trucks that are in their 30s. And there are other trucks, once these are delivered, that will be approaching 30. The communication money, listen, Waterford just did theirs for like $10 million, something like that. And then they rent spaces to other PDs now to use their radio system. This is not about that. This is a consensus from the fire chiefs that say we need a couple of dollars to patch some holes in our radio communication problems. This is not a silver bullet. It's not going to solve it. But what it's going to do is patch it till we finally get off our butts and decide how we're going to handle communication in this city in the future. I went to Wales way back, and I'm in a city called Crickhowell. And Crickhowell is hundreds of miles from the communication center that the police are dispatched from. In mountains, iron-rich, coal-rich mountains. And the officer had no problem picking up command center, hundreds of miles away. I was a cop. I chased a guy on the railroad tracks behind the police department, yelling on my radio that I needed assistance, and I got last unit unreadable. And I'm behind the police department. The radio problems in Norwich is well over 20 years issues. Well over, guys are using their cell phones. So listen, we can all sit back and say this is the wrong way to do this. And putting 100,000, 200,000, 500,000 for, that's going to be fine. That's what we should do. But that's not going to fix this problem right now. We're in a desperate need here to fix this problem. So yeah, this was my idea, and it's what I was pushing since the first time I got reelected, and this is how long it took me to get it to here, my last few months. I'm going to support this, and it's to you. It's to you now. This Public Safety Committee did what it had to do. It left a bad taste in our mouths, but we had to do this. This is what we had to do. Now it's up to you whether you want to support it or not. But keep in mind, you don't support it, you're going to have 35, 36-year-old fire trucks out there coming to save you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Mr. Martin?
Hold that thought. A lot of the comments been made here about this issue and others are quite troubling for me as a political newcomer. You know, I ran my own business for 11 years. I pay my own taxes. I do my own thing. You know, I don't spend what I don't have, but obviously municipalities operate in a different manner. As far as fire trucks, I did a lot of research because I also am on the Public Safety Committee, and I looked at all kinds of ways to try to reduce money by looking at pre-used and repurposed things. We have a lot of unique challenges in Norwich because our firehouses are from the horse and buggy days. We don't have high doors to get equipment in and out, so that means that pieces have to be custom made to fit these particular houses and their situations, which adds to the cost. And it's a problem, you know. Laurel Hill, every antenna that goes into that, the ceilings are so low in there. It's a wonder that one truck, if it doesn't have water in it, it won't even fit in it because it's too high. It'll hit the top of the doors. We didn't get in this situation overnight, you know. Things have changed. Calcium chloride on the roads, that gift that keeps giving from the state of Connecticut, has taken, usually the lifespan of a piece of fire apparatus was 30 years. Now, due to the calcium chloride and corrosion, is scaled back to 20 years, which means that as soon as we're done paying for them, we'll be ready for some new ones. And that's sad. By bonding, you really don't give the taxpayers a real image of what the real cost of doing business is on a daily basis. Sure, you can take a $5 million bond and divide it by 20 and come up to $250,000 a year. Okay. But the people that sit in these chairs here, this is a political position. You know, it's a baby kissing contest. It's not always about making all the right decisions. Most people get it right most of the time, but we don't always get it right. In the case of these trucks, it's been wrong for a very long time. And while I didn't agree with Alderman Nash on this principle, and, you know, we didn't, I knew that the way that I wanted to do it, there was more support to do it this way on the council than the way I wanted to do it. And the way it is now, that if they don't do this, they don't get any trucks. So we're behind the 8 ball, no matter which way we look at it. We can't let the city fall apart on itself just so somebody can say, I want my taxes lowered, I want my taxes lowered, I want taxes lowered. If we don't have any city due to the infrastructure and the public safety not existing, then it's not even a real city. You know? We have a rich history that we want to preserve, a good way of doing things, and we have a lot of natural beauty in this city. A lot of historical landmarks, a beautiful waterfront, and we need to protect it. So I'm going to be supporting this bond. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? I will remind the council that what we're voting on tonight is to put this to the referendum vote. Okay? Hearing no further discussion, those in favor of the resolution, which is to put this on for referendum to the voters. Those in favor? And those opposed? It's unanimous.
Number 2, relative to writing for referendum vote to be held in conjunction with the municipal election on November 7, 2017, regarding the entitled An Ordinance Appropriating $5 million for the City of Norwich Infrastructure Improvement Program 2017, and authorizing the issuance of $5 million bonds of the city to meet said appropriation, and pending the issuance thereof, the making of temporary borrowing for such purpose.
A motion and a second, please. Alderman Braddock, Alderwoman Gould, is there discussion? Hearing none, those in favor? And that's unanimous.
Number 3, relative to the sale of 19 Ward Street.
Is there a motion and a second, please? Alderman Nash, Alderman Braddock, is there discussion? Hearing none, those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
New business ordinances. Number 1, an ordinance appropriating...
Just for clarification, because we've had lots of ordinances, lots of resolutions and things, this new business ordinance, this is the first reading. There'll be no public speaking on it, and there will be no vote this week. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Number 1, an ordinance appropriating $800,000 for the planning, acquisition, and construction of improvements to the Norwich Golf Course, and authorizing the issuance of $800,000 bonds of the city to meet said appropriation, and pending the issuance thereof, the making of temporary borrowing for such purpose.
Is there a motion and second to send a referral to the Commission on the City Plan to the Town of Montville, schedule a public hearing on the proposed ordinance for September 18th at 7 p.m., said ordinance being given its first reading? Alderman Martin, Alderwoman Gould, second. Those in favor? And that's unanimous.
Number 2, an ordinance amending section 6.3 of the Norwich zoning regulations as adopted by ordinance number 1721 on 10/19/2015, entitled Motor Vehicle Sales and Repair.
Is there a motion and second to send a referral to the Commission on City Plan, DEEP, Southeastern Connecticut Council of Governments, and the towns of Montville, Bosra, Lisbon, and Preston schedule a public hearing on the proposed ordinance for September 18, 2017 at 7 p.m., said ordinance being given its first reading. And there'll be a second reading on September 18th. Alderman Nash, and seconded by Alderman Martin. Those in favor? I will entertain a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
And a second, please. Alderman Braddock, all those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all very much.